Right. Have a think about this movement. It's an interesting movement with things happening in it that we want to try and repeat and recall in other movements. In particular, I'm going to come a bit closer, so you'll miss my arms, but if you have a look at my knees, so quite often what happens is when we turn, you can see my knees now, they're twisting around. I'm exaggerating this. Now, there's a certain amount of sideways movement available to your knees. It's not a typical hinge joint, but too much of this is going to damage your knees. So the other thing about it, even if it doesn't damage the knees, this causes the whole structure to collapse. So as I turn, I want to make sure that I turn from the center of my body. Now, if I turn too far, sooner or later, one or other of my legs is going to come out of line. The usual way this happens, but it can vary, is that, so if I turn this way, which is to my left, but to your right, you can see my left knee, or this knee, my right knee, but the knee on your left, gets pulled out of line, and vice versa. The same would happen in this stance when I'm forward. The tendency for the back knee to collapse in, and same thing there. This isn't quite such a risk for the knees when we do it in this stance, by the way, because the weight's not in it. And here you've only got 50% of your weight, so it's not a vital issue to begin with. But as you get more used to this, you do want to do something about it. So one thing is to be careful about where you're turning from. It's the hips and waist, remember, not this movement with your legs. That's one thing. Another is not to turn too far, because sooner or later you will pull your legs out of line. And then make sure that you've got this slight curve in your knees. That increases the strength and the resilience of your legs. So if I pull my knees back, then even the slightest movement will make them turn. If I push them forwards, I have some scope for keeping them there. The final thing, and this takes a while to develop and to build up, so it's just introducing it, is that as I turn this way, again, this is exaggerated, what I want to do is rotate that knee outwards, and then I turn this way. It's too far, you can see because I've exaggerated, I rotate out. Now the thing is, what I want to happen is for that rotation to come at the same time as it's being pulled in. So it's like if you watch somebody in a river and they're swimming up the river at the same speed the river's pushing them back, it'll look as though they're staying still. It's that kind of principle. Another way of thinking of it, which one of my teachers uses, is not to rotate out, but to push the knee forwards, which amounts to the same thing in my understanding of it. I suppose the rotation out for me is a better way of doing it, but it does require a bit of work. You have to get used to using the muscles on the outside of the leg and getting that sense of a stretch on the inside of the leg as well. So it's something to gradually build into your practice. It took me a number of years to do this. So you just keep coming back to it. Truth to tell, I think there was always a certain amount of movement there. And particularly if you're wearing long leggings of one kind or another, the very act of making this rotating movement outwards will cause some movement in the leggings. So I've noticed that when I'm wearing shorts like this and my knees are visible, it always looks much better but there's always a little bit of movement that looks as though the knees are moving. But a certain amount of sideways movement isn't a problem. Keep going with this, but one other thing I'll point out here at this point, when we do the stepping, and particularly when we step through, I always say to you, you can turn the foot out a little bit. And what that would do is cause you to turn this way. Again, I'm exaggerating. Now you can see there my back knee's being pulled out of line. The other way of keeping it in line would be to raise the heel. So we can use this connection between hip and knee and between knee and ankle to actually, what we can do effectively, again, exaggerating a great deal, is this. There and then there. And you can see the turning in center will actually help to move your foot. So once we've started to think about this, we realize that the movement and the directions that come from the center of our body affect our legs as well as arms. And so this takes you to a slightly more subtle level of awareness of what's going on in the body, and reinforces this idea of the significance of that center part of your body. There are several variations on this movement that do involve the legs moving. So if, for instance, I start to move my weight from side to side, I can also raise up the heel. So this is a little bit like hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. This is quite nice. A bit of variety, and you get that movement of the weight as well. Just be wary of doing this, leaning. I knew one teacher, he wasn't a Tai Chi teacher, but he did this and he was always leaning out. You really want that upright stance. Another one, which is a little bit trickier, is that as you go across into one leg, you turn there and you turn the opposite foot in. So this starts to happen. This isn't particularly easy to do on this surface, by the way. It's not always an easy one to do, but it's also quite good. And I like the way with this one, I get a feeling of just dropping down. So there's a few little variants. I'm going to have to sort this out now. There's a few little variants that you can make use of once you're used to the basic movement. And as always, with the preparatory exercises in the way that we're using them, these are useful exercises to practice. And I think that growing awareness of a connection down into our feet and legs is a very good one too. And just raising your arms a little. Okay, and then just drop the hands down. So in the basic stance, what we're looking for is these lines, shoulders to hips to feet. So two parallel lines going down either side of your body, and one in the middle going down from the crown of your head, so that would hit the ground between your feet and just behind the ball of your feet. Always remembering that the hip width could be quite narrow if you measure it from the outside of your foot, or as a lot of people do, from the midline of your foot or from the inside of your foot, which gives you the slightly wider stance, which is, I tend to veer between mid and inner rather than the slightly narrower outer. They're often related to particular styles of Tai Chi, one or other of the family styles of Tai Chi, but they're all very valid. One image you can use is that you're holding the ball between the tops of your legs. And that's quite an interesting one. So leaving aside the, oh, you've got to rotate the knee in and out. If that doesn't work for you, if you can maintain this image, then you have to apply just enough pressure to keep the ball there, but not so much that you're pressing hard against the ball. So you have to imagine the ball is the right size. So different ways of actually looking at this. And then letting your hips drop back a little bit more, sinking down and pushing up. And sinking down. Bring your hands around as though you're cradling the ball. The push up expands through your upper body, pushing your elbows out. Just a little and down. Fingers are pointing inwards the whole time, cradling the ball, pushing up. And so you're in water, pressing the ball down into water. With a change, particularly lower back, buttocks, legs, as you sink down, becoming sort of fuller. And then eventually what you want is for that to remain as you're pushing up. So that to begin with, I think quite often the center of gravity lowers and lifts. It's kind of like this, but get a sense of pushing away from the ground, away from the root, rather than lifting your center of gravity up, so that your body expands eventually right out of the ground, like a plant growing out from its seed, like a plant growing out from its root, of course. You can just feel the building of the movement from your hips up through your back and spine. And then changing to the wild goose, your hands coming out. This emphasizes the expansion more towards your solar plexus, the lower part of your chest. I've seen it listed as a useful exercise for tightness in your chest. Breathe in. And then same action in your hips and legs, parting the clouds. So these would be familiar movements for many of you. You're watching live or on video, but try not to sort of overlook them. It's very easy to do that as we become more familiar with the particular exercise. It's quite interesting just to really focus on an exercise. And one of the things I find interesting about teaching is that when particularly when I'm teaching beginners, or somebody asks a question about one of these exercises, I often have to sort of rethink what I'm doing. And it's always a valuable exercise, I think. Change the dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So, same thing, pushing up, but just focus your attention on one side. Take your time. And then switching the focus of your attention to the other side. So it's a simple enough exercise. I generally do it these days with the hips going up and down, but what you could do, and this is quite an interesting exercise and definitely something that is worth building on, is to make this movement, this rise and fall of your hips smaller, until eventually your hips aren't actually going up and down at all. What they're doing is still hanging back. So you don't stop there, you stop there. And this is a posture that actually helps us to get a sense for the pull of gravity working through our body. It allows gravity to work through our body rather than with the knees straight and locked, which is a kind of resistance to the movement. That feeling of lower back, hips and buttocks overhanging, as I sometimes describe it, is one way of thinking of it. Point is with this exercise, that, and indeed sort of subsequent exercises, is that the basic dynamic which drove the first three movements, hips sinking down and legs pushing you up, is still going on. It's just more subtle. Gravity is still there, still working through your body, but still yielding to the pull of gravity. So there's still a downward movement, a downward energy working through you. And of course, you haven't just collapsed on the floor. So there is that upward movement. So it's much more subtle, but we can still begin to feel that dynamic within the body. In practice, you'll probably feel it for a while and then lose it. Maybe just feel it for a few moments. What I would say is at that point, go back to the bigger movement, remind yourself what it feels like, and then just gradually make it smaller. So we begin to get a much more internal perspective on the movements. And Tai Chi is often described as an internal art, an art that produces the movements from the inside out rather than the other way around. Which isn't to say that the external movements aren't relevant, because they're how we learn, but also Tai Chi should embrace all of them. So it's not a question of one being more important than the other, or one disappearing because the other one appears. It's just in a sense, a resetting of our attention, a resetting of our perspective on these movements, and developing a much more full body sense of what is actually going on, rather than just our arms and maybe a bit of a stretch on the inside. We feel that expansion going up through the inside of the body, very, very subtly. One more on each side. And then change into pushing in full direction, still with your hips dropping back. And we get much more of a sense of the whole of our body moving as one unit when we work from the inside, less fragmented. more flowing, more a sense of that inner strength. So all the really key elements of Tai Chi are enhanced as we begin to take a more internalized view of what's going on, or rather a view from inside out rather than from outside in. I wouldn't want to dismiss the significance of the external movements. One more round. Excuse me. And then changing. So this posture with your hips sinking back, will, if you practice it, will leave your legs really in a sort of state of equilibrium. Which I mean that the various tissues in your leg, muscle, tendon, ligament, fascia, that kind of thing, whatever's involved in supporting the structure of the leg, are all under equal load. You know, to turn this time. Again, the image I've often used is guy ropes on a tent. So they could all take a little bit more without going into a tight, locked up feeling. And this contributes to the springiness of our legs. Change size. The same is true for the upper part of your body as well, of course. I've been talking about this basic posture. And if it's comfortable, add the turn. So you should feel as you add the turn that on the outside of the turn, that side of the body, there's an extension in the muscles that should be quite comfortable, and it then just draws you back. It's more likely to be felt if you've got that sense of your weight sinking down, you've got the structure in your legs to support your upper body. And what it shows is that when we do make a movement like this, the returning movement is more or less automatic. But now sink down a little bit more, pushing up, and then rowing the boat in the middle of the lake. Staying down, just loads the legs a little bit more for the push up, and then hips going back, nice and easy in your knees and your back. And then polishing the table. One more time on each side. And then, so this is the basic posture that we want. This is the one where we want to be staying. This is the one that we want to use when we walk down the road, or we stand in the queue at the shop, or do the washing up, or whatever. We want to get to a point where we simply don't lock our knees back. A lot of people do this. In fact, most of us do this. And what this means is every time we walk, there's an impact on knees and sometimes hips and ankles, which in the end is quite damaging to the knees. If you remember, I remember when I was a kid, I was jumping off a wall while there were adults around. Inevitably, somebody would turn around and say, "Bend your knees when you land." So, because if you kept landing on your knees hard, then you would damage them in the end. The deeper postures have several advantages. One is that they condition our legs more strongly, so that if we practice doing this or more than this, then this is well within our range. We're more likely to maintain it. They also give an extra boost, of course, because when we go from here to here, it's kind of the equivalent. If you've got a ball in your hand and you're going to throw it over there, you don't just do that. You do this, and then you wind back and do. So you get that extra sort of sense of movement coming out. It deepens the root and it increases the pressure of the springiness of the legs. So that is also quite often used. They're used as training stances, and sometimes we do this in what we call horse riding stance, these very low postures. However, it's interesting that when, for instance, in some styles of Tai Chi, they have a fast form, that's generally done in a higher stance, not locked, but not low down. And when you see people, say in a ring doing some kind of martial arts competition, you very rarely see them bend their knees a great deal. They'll leave their knees loose, like a boxer or something like that, to move around, but they won't be right down here because there's not much. But occasionally, if they're grappling, standing grappling, they might do. So the deeper stances are training stances primarily. They're worth doing, and they're also worth doing if we want to get that extra sense of that internal power coming from our legs. I mentioned hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. So let's have a go at that just to see how that's working. So now if you remember in the start of the class, I introduced this as an exercise. So now we're doing effectively the same thing, and only slower. You go across, you turn, and this allows more weight into your supporting leg. So normally it would only be 60%, but by now maybe 70 or maybe 80. And you've also managed to bring this hip around, so you brought the shoulder around as well. This gives you that deeper sense of that, and this will spring you back. Imagine doing this on a trampoline. It springs you back and then move across. I'm going to have my feet a little bit wider for this. And then going across. So here, so this movement could be that. It isn't, so, but because it's this leg release and the temptation, there's often a temptation to that. So there's a rise in movement in the way that I just described, but it doesn't lift our hips. We don't allow it to lift our hips. We keep our hips and our shoulders level. That doesn't mean that we don't feel that movement pushing up through our body. Bring your hands around in front of you, and then as you go across, you can mirror my movements, hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. But just rest here for a moment and feel that extension through the side of your body. It's not so different to what we would feel with Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky. And you're sinking down in this leg. It's not a big deep posture, but it's quite strong in that leg. Rotate the top hand down, come back into your opposite leg and feel the same thing here, feel the extension here, feel the pressure building from your supporting leg. And then just make sure that you give yourself time to really feel both of those things, because both of them offer you the return movement. There's the push from the leg, but there's also a pull down. So although it's called hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, and that's a very nice image, a very clear image for your rising hand to follow, quite dynamic, quite strong. But at the same time, there's the descending hand. And what you could imagine here is, and you need to think about this a little bit, I should think. But from here, what you can do is you turn your hand palm down. You imagine there's a ball underneath your hand and you're in water. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull that ball down. And you're going to do it by dropping this empty hip as you push across. And you'll probably find, as is happening with me at the moment, that you forget what to do with the other hand when you do this. But it means that both movements are quite meaningful. So hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, another interesting movement, because it does have this very dynamic quality. The movement from within as always, but with an awareness of the name and the image that we would associate with the name. So it's interesting that all these sort of subtle elements really build in to this very dynamic art. And again, remembering that Tai Chi itself was originally a martial art, and these exercises are, for the most part, the exercises we do in these sessions are very much from the Tai Chi end of the sort of Qigong spectrum. Qigong is a much broader term than Tai Chi itself, but most of what we do in these sessions is in that area that Tai Chi exists. And then because we're doing this, we've got the basic movement. Let's change to cow gazes at the moon. Just let your hands drop down, letting them swing up. And then back down. Notice the position of my arms here in the middle and out again. And it's going to be quite a sort of stretchy movement. But to begin with, as I'm doing, and I'm looking towards the sort of front corner, top corner of the room. And then if I feel it's appropriate, I need to come forward a little bit. I might go a little bit further. But what I would do from here is I'd sink down more, because that creates the space in my body. And very, very carefully turn it strong, but it's not a full stretch. So when you feel the pull in the sides, either stop at that point, before it becomes too restrictive, or if you can, just get that sense of releasing more in hip and knee to see if that creates a little bit more space. What you don't want to do is to get to here and twist your shoulders around to look over your back. That's going to hurt your back. And there's a pull on your ribs and on your spine as your muscles engage more strongly, but again, not gripping tight. So if you can do this, it's quite good, but yeah, don't force it. But yeah, you can come around quite a. I can get to there reasonably comfortably if there isn't a wall behind me, which is always there. But I would start off like this, much smaller movement, just to see how my back was working and what was appropriate at any particular time. Good, and then just straighten up your feet. And if you do work on this rotation outwards in your legs, you start to feel that as your upper body turns in one direction, there's a kind of spiraling coming up through the middle of your back, but a counter spiral down through the legs as well. So it gives you a sense not just for the alignment of your legs, the structure of your legs, but also the sense of energy there as well. Shake out. So 1 foot forwards, transferring your weight, your front foot pointing straight ahead, back foot between 30 and 45 degrees. The length of your step and the width of your step roughly the same to begin with. The width of your step is the width of your hips. Length about the same, or maybe as you settle down a bit more, maybe a little bit longer, but never a huge stride. Now, I'm going to exaggerate the step in a little bit. So I was talking about how the hip coming around will help you to move your foot. I normally say you can turn the front foot out a little bit, and that helps to just get the weight down in through my hip a little bit more. It's generally quite a small movement. It's just a slight opening, but do it just a little bit extra so that now as you go forward, there's a very definite turning. So you turn to the front, but then you turn out a little bit more. I am exaggerating this a little bit. from the side. See, I get here. See how my hip coming around. So what you want to do is, as you feel that hip coming around, just let that help to take your heel off the ground. And then here, and you can see how my foot begins to swivel inwards when I do that. So again, this gives us another aspect of the connection between what's happening in the center of our body and what's happening in our legs and our feet. So the move here is, what I've often said here is that the angle of the feet determines the turning in your center one way or another. But actually, it's not quite that straightforward now. It's a little bit more nuanced. And there's a sort of dialogue that begins to take place between feet and hips. And then, just stepping in. And you notice I'm not actually turning my back foot out as far now. Again, it's one of these things that once you have a sense to it, it can become very, very subtle. It doesn't need a great deal. There are other things going on as well that will move the leg. The contraction and the expansion in your leg and so on. As always, anyone acting Tai Chi is spread through the whole of your body. But again, what I often do is I'm trying to develop a movement or develop an aspect of a movement. I may well exaggerate certain aspects of that. And then on the other side, first of all, just transferring your weight. So once again, we have an example of a very simple movement, one that would be very easy to, in a sense, just drift along with. And yet, when we stop and think about it and sort of focus on it a little bit, we realize there's a great deal going on that is quite interesting. And then just raising toes and heel, getting that little bit of a turn. Again, I am exaggerating just how much you might do this, would depend on the movement that you're doing. Here in the ordinary walking, eventually it's barely noticeable. If I hold my hands here, you'll see here when I go into the back leg, there's quite a big turn. If I want to do that, I don't have to do that. Here, as I go into the slightly turned out front foot, barely noticeable. And remember, small movements are the basic units of movement, bricks and mortar of the entire structure, the entire movement. So the more we can bring in, the more the load is spread through the body, stepping in. And when that happens, no one part of the body need be tightened, need be constricted. And if we can maintain that sense of space that comes out through that openness, then we create the potential for the sense of movement, the flow, the energy, and so on. Now just stepping through. While you're doing this, think about that feeling of your hips hanging back. That's what's going to help you to remain stable. The fact that you're still yielding to the pull of gravity, change direction. And so the pull of gravity is drawing your center of gravity down without resistance, hopefully, until it meets the resilience of your legs and the ground. Don't be surprised if when I go into sort of strong detail like this about a particular movement or an aspect of a movement, if it really doesn't work to start off with and everything falls apart. When I was talking about this downward movement in hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, the first couple of times, the other hand didn't know what to do because I'd taken all the attention away from it. And this thing about the alignment of my knees, when I first started working on it, I went for a few days, and every time I went out to practice, I would start thinking about my knees, and I couldn't do anything else. I would start doing some movements, I'll start doing a sequence or something like that. And after a couple of moves, it all fell apart. I'd forget what I was supposed to be doing because I was really, really focused on my knees. That will pass. It's an inevitable consequence, really, of really focusing your attention tightly. But it's still worth doing, I think. Sometimes if there's something you're trying to clarify in the move. Okay, so let's go back to having 1 foot forwards, just mirror my movements. Let's go into fisherman cast the net. So what I tend to do with these things is that when I begin to work on them, alignment of the knees or very subtle movements, is I will visit them occasionally. And I'll be prepared to do that over a significant period of time. It took me several years with that alignment of the knees, and I still get it wrong sometimes. But eventually it just becomes part of the habit of movement. It's always worth noting with fisherman cast the net that the arms move in an arc down from the weight of my arm here, and it will swing up just a little bit, not far. I'm not trying to do this. I'm not trying to make it happen. It's just like if you were walking along, swinging a bag along, you wouldn't be thinking about lifting it up. It would just go up quite naturally. You get a conker on a piece of string and wave it to and fro, the conker will swing up. So the momentum of the movement, the energy of the movement does that for you. And the circle, as always, is the natural automatic movement of anything that's attached at one end, but not at the other. And then pushing wave. And then coming back, and this time the circle is horizontal, with the movement stirring the beams. So this is quite challenging to the alignment of our knees. It's not the simplest of exercises. But don't be surprised if you suddenly realise that your knees are going a little bit out of line. The thing that I really look for with keeping the knees in line is that little bit of a stretch between knee and groin. But you may notice something different. It's useful to have a simple reference point, something that you can begin to recognize. Lovely. And then left foot forwards, fisherman castanet. And pushing wave. So we become used to certain qualities, sensations within our bodies. And as we become used to them, we quite often notice them by their absence. Oh, my back knee's collapsing. Well, yeah, we want to correct that. That doesn't mean that it did it the previous dozen times. Maybe this is the first time it did it, or the second time you did it. So be careful of being too self-critical with these things. And then stir in the beans. Sink your hips. That period of your pelvis hanging from the spine. Okay, shake it. Let's do dragonfly skims the water. So sinking into your back foot, just turning, just do a couple like this. Go forwards, turn. And now when you turn, let that turn help to bring your back heel up like this and bring your foot in. And here, this movement, again, I'm exaggerating, can help to initiate at least the movement in the foot. This time we step forwards, we do the same thing again. Yeah, to there. And of course, you know, we could use this to bring the foot in. So then, going into the full movement. Dragonfly skims the water. Swinging the foot through. One more in this direction if you've got space. If not, well, just take a step, but now change direction. Always remember with a movement like this that I tend to do it straight forwards and backwards for the sake of the camera, but I could go over here. And I have to think, well, okay, so maybe I'm going to go in this direction for a few movements. Oops, there. And then now I'm going out of camera shot, and you can see, so I might have to come back in. But it doesn't have to be linear in that sense. Especially the key thing is here. It's at this point, where do I put the foot down? That determines the next movement. If I put it down there, I'm going to go that way. If I decide to put it down there, I'm going to go that way. If I put it down there, I'm going to go back. The dragonfly skims the water. Okay, so rubbing your hands together, tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Onto one shoulder. The other side. Onto your back. Around your hips. Legs. Light on your belly. The upper part of your chest. So just standing, giving yourself a few moments once again to align your posture, weight a little bit forwards, hips dropping back. Your hips drop down for that extra bit of a push up. Embrace tiger, return to mountain, and just letting everything settle on that final stage of dropping down. You know, whatever you picked up from the class today is there. What you haven't isn't worth chasing. And just remember that some of these things that I'm talking about, you know, it's a gradual awareness that you build up over a period of time. Don't be in a hurry. One more time. And rest. Check out. Thank you very much as always. Joining in and watching.